What happens when seasoned television host decides she's had enough of celebrity excuses and Hollywood privilege? You won't believe what unfolds when Sunny Host comes face to face with Emma Watson in what was supposed to be a straightforward discussion about her latest charitable endeavors. The tension that erupted on last night's show has everyone talking, and the explosive confrontation that followed will leave you speechless. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouses clash in the most heated exchange we've seen all year. The atmosphere in the studio was electric from the moment Emma Watson walked onto the set. Sunny Host, known for her sharp wit and unwillingness to back down from tough conversations, had clearly done her homework. As the activist and actress settled into her chair, adjusting her dress with that familiar, nervous gesture viewers have come to recognize, there was an unmistakable tension crackling in the air. The production team had briefed everyone that this would focus on Emma's recent mental health advocacy and her work with UN Women. But Sunny had other plans brewing beneath her professional smile. "Emma Watson, thank you for joining us tonight," Sunny began, her voice warm, but carrying an undertone that suggested this wouldn't be the typical celebrity softball interview. "I have to say, it's fascinating to have someone here who's spoken so much about authenticity and truth-telling, especially given some of the recent revelations that have come to light." Emma's posture shifted slightly, her media-trained smile faltering for just a moment. "Well, Sunny, I appreciate being here. I think it's important to have these conversations, especially about feminism and the work we're doing to support women who have sacrificed so much." But Sunny wasn't letting her off that easily. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with the precision of a prosecutor who'd found a crack in the defense. "That's interesting that you mentioned sacrifice, because I think that's exactly what we need to talk about tonight. You've built a brand around being the celebrity who walked away from the mainstream, the one who chose activism over simple fame. But I have to ask, at what cost to others?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Emma's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but Sunny caught it. She'd been doing this long enough to read the micro-expressions that revealed when someone was about to get defensive. "I'm not sure I follow your question," Emma replied, her accent seeming to sharpen with tension. "Everything I've done has been about using my platform for good and being true to my values." Sunny let out a small laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Your values. Let's talk about those values because I've been watching your trajectory very carefully, and I have to say some of the patterns I'm seeing are deeply troubling." The studio audience, which had been murmuring with excitement moments before, fell into an expectant silence. Even the camera operator seemed to sense that something significant was about to unfold. Sunny had that look, the same expression she wore when she was about to deliver a legal argument that would dismantle her opponent piece by piece. "You see, Emma Watson, you've positioned yourself as this champion of social justice and mental health, this advocate for authenticity. But every time you claim to want privacy, you sign another multi-million-dollar deal to tell your story. Every time you talk about protecting women, you throw another celebrity under the bus in the process." Emma's hands, which had been resting casually on the armrests of her chair, now gripped them tightly. "I think that's a very unfair characterization of what I've been trying to do. I've been trying to break cycles of pain and create a better future for young women." "Break cycles?" Sunny's voice rose slightly, and there was no mistaking the skepticism dripping from every word or perpetuate them in a different direction. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've taken the same playbook that you claim to despise, using media manipulation, playing victim, and profiting from public drama, and just pointed it in a different direction." The actress's face flushed slightly, a telltale sign that Sunny's words were hitting their mark. "I think you're misunderstanding the situation entirely. I've been trying to heal, to grow, to become a better person and advocate." "At whose expense?" Sunny shot back without missing a beat. "Because every interview you give, every documentary you participate in, every book deal you sign seems to come at the expense of colleagues who can't defend themselves in the same public forum. And now you want to lecture the world about authenticity." The tension in the room was becoming palpable. Camera operators adjusted their positions to capture every nuance of the exchange, while the studio audience sat transfixed by the verbal sparring match unfolding before them. This was clearly not going according to anyone's script, least of all Emma's. "I've never claimed to be perfect," Emma said, her voice taking on a defensive edge that sharp-eared viewers would immediately recognize. "But I've been honest about my struggles and my journey." Sunny leaned back in her chair, a predatory smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Honest? That's the word you want to use? Because I've been doing my research, and there are some very interesting inconsistencies in the various versions of your story that you've told across different platforms and interviews." The actress's media training was clearly kicking in as she tried to maintain her composure, but cracks were beginning to show. "I think context is important in any conversation about complex industry dynamics and personal growth." "Context," Sunny repeated, her tone making it clear she found the word insufficient. "Let's talk about context then. The context of a woman who grew up with unimaginable privilege, who was given every opportunity, every advantage, and who now makes millions by complaining about how hard her life has been." The studio fell into an almost uncomfortable silence as those words landed. Emma's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, anger, calculation, as she processed what had just been said and formulated her response. But Sunny wasn't finished. "And the most troubling part," she continued, her voice gaining momentum like a prosecuting attorney building toward her closing argument, "is that you've wrapped this entire enterprise in the language of social justice and mental health advocacy, as if profiting from personal trauma somehow becomes noble when you donate a portion of the proceeds to charity." Emma's carefully maintained composure was beginning to crack in earnest now. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried a new edge of irritation. "I think you're deliberately mischaracterizing my motivations and the work that I'm doing." But Sunny was just getting started, and as she prepared to deliver her next verbal assault, it became clear that this confrontation was about to escalate far beyond what anyone in that studio could have anticipated. "Let me ask you something directly, Emma Watson," Sunny said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "When you decided to write your essays, when you chose to sit down for those tell-all interviews, did you ever stop to consider the collateral damage? Did you ever think about the people who couldn't fight back?" Emma's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "I think everyone has the right to tell their own story, Sunny. And I think it's pretty rich coming from someone who makes a living dissecting other people's lives on television." The audience drew in a collective breath. This was the moment when professional courtesy died and personal animosity took over. Sunny's smile turned razor sharp. "That's exactly the response I expected," she said, nodding as if Emma had just proven her point. "Deflection. Attack the messenger when you can't defend the message. It's the same playbook every entitled celebrity uses when they're called out on their behavior." "Entitled?" Emma's voice rose for the first time, her carefully maintained composure finally beginning to crack. "You want to talk about entitled? You sit here in your ivory tower, judging people you have never met, making assumptions about situations you know nothing about." Sunny leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. "I know what I see, Emma Watson. I see a pattern of behavior that's deeply concerning. You claim to want privacy while simultaneously selling that privacy to the highest bidder. You talk about breaking cycles while perpetuating the exact same behaviors you claim to despise." "You don't know what you're talking about," Emma shot back, her accent becoming more pronounced as her agitation grew. "You have no idea what it's like to grow up in that environment, to have every aspect of your life scrutinized and controlled." "And there it is," Sunny said, triumph evident in her voice. "The victim card right on schedule. Because whenever you're confronted with the consequences of your choices, it's always someone else's fault, isn't it? It's the media's fault. It's the industry's fault. It's the institution's fault. Never your fault." The studio was electric with tension now. Production assistants were frantically whispering into their headsets, unsure whether to intervene or let this combustible situation continue. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every micro-expression, every flash of anger, every moment of this rapidly deteriorating interview. "I've taken responsibility for my mistakes," Emma said through gritted teeth. but I won't sit here and be lectured by someone who's never walked in my shoes." Sunny laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Walked in your shoes? You mean designer shoes that were handed to you at birth? You want to talk about walking in shoes? Let's talk about the people whose lives you've impacted with your choices. Let's talk about other actresses dealing with their careers while you're out there selling stories about private Hollywood conversations." Emma's face went pale, then flushed red. "How dare you bring up other people's careers? That's completely out of line." "Out of line?" Sunny's voice rose to match hers. "You know what's out of line? Profiting from personal pain while positioning yourself as some kind of humanitarian hero. You know what's out of line? Using your activist past as emotional blackmail every time someone questions your motives." The mention of her past was clearly the wrong button to push. Emma shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the studio floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the suddenly silent space. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare bring my activism into this." But Sunny wasn't backing down. She remained seated, looking up at her with unflinching determination. "Why not? You bring it into everything else. Every interview, every speech, every justification for your behavior. My work would have wanted this. My work would have understood that. You've turned your activism into a marketing tool." "That's enough," Emma said, her hands visibly shaking with rage. "I came here in good faith to talk about important issues, and you've turned this into a character assassination." "Good faith." Sunny stood up now, meeting her at eye level. "Good faith would have been being honest about your motivations from the beginning. Good faith would have been acknowledging the hurt you've caused instead of constantly playing the victim. Good faith would have been having this conversation without your PR team pre-approving every question." "My PR team didn't approve anything," Emma snapped. "And if they had, they would have warned me about walking into an ambush." Sunny's eyes lit up with vindication. "An ambush? Is that what we're calling accountability now? Because from where I stand, this is the first time someone has asked you real questions instead of lobbing you softballs and letting you control the narrative." The confrontation had reached a crescendo that nobody in the studio could have predicted. Two strong-willed personalities, each convinced of their own righteousness, facing off in a battle that had transcended the boundaries of a typical interview. The air itself seemed to crackle with animosity. "You know what your problem is, Sunny," Emma said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You hide behind the pretense of journalism to justify your cruelty. You tear people down and call it holding them accountable." "And you know what your problem is?" Sunny fired back without hesitation. "You've never been held truly accountable for anything in your entire life. So the moment someone asks you hard questions, you fall apart and start throwing accusations." The studio audience was watching this exchange like spectators at a tennis match, heads turning back and forth between the two combatants. Some looked uncomfortable, others appeared riveted by the raw emotion on display. This was television gold, even if it was rapidly spiraling out of control. "I've been held accountable," Emma insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "I've acknowledged my mistakes. I've worked to make amends." "Have you?" Sunny challenged. "Or have you just found new ways to monetize your trauma while avoiding any real consequences for your actions? Because from where I sit, accountability looks different than million-dollar endorsement deals and Netflix contracts." Emma's jaw worked silently for a moment, as if she were trying to formulate a response that wouldn't make things worse. But the damage was already done. The mask had slipped, and everyone in that studio could see the anger, the entitlement, and the frustration that she'd been working so hard to keep hidden. "This interview is over," she finally said, though she made no move toward the exit. "Is it?" Sunny asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because we still have 15 minutes left, and I have a lot more questions about the inconsistencies in your various public statements." The challenge hung in the air between them, and it was clear that Emma was at a crossroads. She could walk away and look like she was running from the confrontation, or she could stay and risk further damage to her carefully cultivated image. Either way, Sunny had her exactly where she wanted her, and everyone in that studio could sense that the worst was yet to come. Emma's decision came swift and decisive. Instead of retreating, she stepped closer to Sunny's desk, her eyes blazing with a fury that had been building throughout the entire exchange. You want to talk about accountability, she said, her voice low and menacing. Let's talk about your accountability, Sunny. Let's talk about how you've built your career on tearing down people who can't fight back. Let's talk about the lives you've destroyed with your so-called journalism. Sunny didn't flinch. If anything, she seemed energized by her aggression. Is that a threat, Emma Watson? Because if it is, you're proving my point beautifully. The moment someone challenges you, you resort to intimidation tactics. It's not a threat, Emma snapped. It's an observation. You sit here pretending to be some kind of moral authority, but you're nothing more than a glorified gossip columnist with a law degree. The insult landed like a physical blow. Sunny's eyes flashed dangerously, and when she spoke, her voice carried the full weight of her legal training and years of experience dealing with hostile witnesses. A gossip columnist, she repeated, her tone deadly calm. That's rich, coming from someone whose entire post-acting career has been built on gossip. Gossip about your colleagues, gossip about your childhood, gossip about private conversations that should have stayed private. You've turned industry secrets into a cottage industry. Emma's composure finally shattered completely. At least I'm telling my own story instead of picking apart other people's lives for entertainment. Your own story? Sunny's voice rose to match her intensity. Which version? The version you told your magazine interviews? The version in your essays? The version you're peddling now? Because they're all different, Emma, and that's the problem. You can't keep your lies straight. I've never lied, Emma protested. But even as the words left her mouth, they sounded hollow and unconvincing. Sunny pounced on the weakness like a predator, sensing wounded prey. Never lied? What about the story you told about your parents cutting you off financially? What about the claims you made about the industry's response to your mental health struggles? What about the timeline of events you've presented regarding your decision to step away? Because I've done my homework, Emma Watson, and none of it adds up. The studio had become a pressure cooker of tension. Camera operators zoomed in to capture every facial expression, every gesture, every sign of the emotional breakdown that seemed inevitable. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what was clearly the most explosive interview confrontation in recent memory. Emma's hands were shaking now. Whether from rage or panic, it was impossible to tell. You don't know what you're talking about. You weren't there. You don't know what really happened. Then tell me, Sunny challenged, leaning forward like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. Tell me the truth, not the sanitized PR-approved version, not the victim narrative you've been selling. Tell me what really happened and why you felt the need to change your story every time you tell it. I don't owe you anything, Emma said, her voice breaking slightly. I don't owe you explanations or justifications or anything else. You're right, Sunny agreed, nodding slowly. You don't owe me anything, but you owe something to all the people who've supported you, who've believed in you, who've defended you when others question your motives. Don't you think they deserve the truth? For a moment, something flickered across Emma's face. Vulnerability, perhaps, or recognition, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a mask of cold fury. The truth, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You want the truth? The truth is that people like you will never be satisfied. No matter what I do, no matter how much I try to make amends or move forward, there will always be someone like you waiting to tear me down for their own benefit. Sunny stood up slowly, her movement deliberate and controlled. People like me? You mean people who ask hard questions? People who don't bow and scrape because you were born into privilege. People who expect you to take real responsibility for your actions. People who profit from other people's pain, Emma shot back. People who hide behind righteousness while destroying lives for ratings. The accusation hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down in challenge. Sunny's response was swift and devastating. You want to talk about profiting from pain? You've made millions selling your past moments. You've turned your activist work, your private struggles, your professional relationships into content for your various projects. And you have the audacity to lecture me about ethics. Emma's face went through a series of expressions. shock, rage, and finally something that looked almost like defeat. But instead of backing down, she seemed to find a reservoir of anger that pushed her past any remaining boundaries of civility. "At least I'm honest about who I am," she said, her voice rising to nearly a shout. "I don't pretend to be some kind of journalistic crusader while ambushing people on live television." "Honest?" Sunny's laugh was harsh and mocking. "You wouldn't know honesty if it bit you on your entitled celebrity behind. You've been lying to yourself and everyone else for so long that I don't think you even remember what the truth looks like anymore." That was the final straw. Emma's face contorted with rage, and she took a step towards Sunny's desk that made several security personnel visibly shift in their positions. "How dare you?" she said, her voice shaking with fury. "How dare you sit there and question my integrity when you spent this entire interview trying to destroy me for ratings?" "I didn't have to try to destroy you," Sunny replied, her voice steady despite the intensity of the moment. "You've done that perfectly well yourself. I just ask questions. If the answers make you look bad, that's not my fault, that's yours." Emma stared at her for a long moment, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the cameras was audible. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Finally, Emma straightened her dress with sharp, angry movements. Her voice, when she spoke, was cold and controlled, but everyone could hear the barely contained fury underneath. "This has been the most unprofessional, biased, and frankly disgusting interview I've ever experienced," she said, her words clipped and precise. "You should be ashamed of yourself, Sunny. This isn't journalism. It's a hatchet job." Sunny remained standing behind her desk, unmoved by her words. "The only thing I'm ashamed of is that it took this long for someone to ask you these questions." Emma's jaw worked silently for a moment, as if she were trying to formulate one final devastating comeback, but instead she simply shook her head in apparent disgust. "I'm done," she said, reaching up to remove her microphone with jerky, agitated movements. "This is exactly the kind of toxic behavior that I left Hollywood to escape, and I refuse to subject myself to it for one more second." She threw the microphone down on her chair with enough force that the sound echoed through the studio speakers. Without another word, she turned and began striding toward the exit, her movements sharp and angry. "Emma Watson, we still have 8 minutes left," Sunny called after her, but her tone suggested she wasn't particularly disappointed by her departure. Emma paused at the edge of the set, turning back one final time. "8 minutes too many," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent studio. "Good luck with your career, Sunny. I hope destroying people on television is everything you thought it would be." With that, she disappeared into the wings, leaving behind a studio full of stunned faces and an audience that seemed uncertain whether to applaud or sit in shocked silence. Sunny remained standing at her desk, watching her retreat with what could only be described as satisfaction. "Well," she said, turning back to face the cameras with a slight smile, "I think that tells us everything we need to know about Emma Watson's commitment to accountability and honest conversation." We'll be right back after this break. As the cameras cut away and the studio lights dimmed, the magnitude of what had just unfolded began to sink in. In less than 30 minutes, one of the most explosive confrontations in television history had played out in real time, leaving everyone involved forever changed by the brutal honesty of what had been revealed.